March 21st, 867 AD. Inside the walls of York, 7,000 Saxon warriors are about to walk into the deadliest trap in Viking history. By sunset, 2 kings will be dead, and England will never be the same. This is the story of the Battle of York, a massacre so complete, so strategically brilliant, that it would become the blueprint for Viking conquest across Europe. A battle where 1,500 professional Viking warriors destroyed an army 5 times their size. Where the legendary Great Heathen Army proved that skill, discipline, and tactical genius could triumph over overwhelming numbers. This is not a tale of heroic last stands. This is a story of how the Viking perfected the art of urban warfare and changed the course of British history in a single afternoon. This is the Battle of York. To understand this battle, we must go back 2 years. Autumn, 865 AD. The largest Viking invasion force ever assembled lands on the shores of East Anglia. Contemporary chronicles call them the Mysore Heathen here, the Great Heathen Army, but historians have since discovered something shocking. This great army numbered only around 1,500 warriors. Some estimates go as high as 3,000, but even at maximum strength, they were drastically outnumbered by their enemies. So how did they conquer most of England? They weren't raiders, they were soldiers. While previous Viking attacks were hit-and-run raids by pirates seeking gold, the Great Heathen Army was something England had never seen. A professional military force with unified command structure, sophisticated logistics, and a brilliant strategic plan, led by the sons of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan Ragnarsson, and they didn't come to plunder, they came to conquer. Their first target, the Kingdom of East Anglia. King Edmund, terrified by their reputation, immediately sued for peace. He gave them horses, silver, supplies, and most importantly, time to train. The Vikings had learned something crucial. In England, cavalry won battles. For the next year, these expert sailors transformed themselves into a mounted army, and by summer 866, they were ready to ride north. Their next target, York, the jewel of Northumbria and the second largest city in all of Britain. But the Vikings had chosen their moment perfectly. Northumbria was tearing itself apart. King Osbert, the legitimate ruler, had been overthrown in a coup by his rival, King Aela. The kingdom was split between 2 courts, 2 armies, 2 kings, each claiming the crown. Brother fought brother, noble against noble. While Northumbria bled itself dry in civil war, Ivar the Boneless was watching and planning. On November 1st, 866 AD, the Great Heathen Army struck. They rode north with terrifying speed, 1,500 mounted warriors covering over 100 miles in days. York defenders had almost no warning. The city's Roman walls were ancient, crumbling in places. The garrison was divided by the Civil War, half loyal to Osbert, half to Aela. There was no unified command, no coordinated defense. The Vikings took York in less than a day. Saxon chronicles recorded the shock. The army of the heathens entered the city of York, and it was theirs. But Ivar knew this was just the beginning. Taking a city is one thing, holding it against a counterattack is another, and he knew that counterattack was coming. What happened next reveals Ivar's military genius. Instead of raiding the countryside or pushing deeper into Northumbria, the Vikings did something unexpected. They stopped. They fortified York, repaired its walls, stockpiled food and weapons. They turned the city into a fortress. Why? Because Ivar was setting a trap. He knew that the fall of York would force Osbert and Aela to put aside their differences. The Vikings had given Northumbria a common enemy, and common enemies create temporary alliances. All winter, as snow fell on York, Viking scouts watched the Saxon armies gathering. Osbert and Aela met in the frozen fields of Northumbria. Former enemies, forced to clasp hands in reluctant alliance. Throughout the winter months of 866 to 867, they assembled their forces. Warriors rode in from every corner of Northumbria. Militia were conscripted, weapons forged. By March 867, they had gathered between 5,000 and 7,000 warriors. On paper, the Saxons outnumbered the Vikings 5 to 1. On paper, they should have crushed them. But Ivar was counting on that confidence, because overconfidence makes armies careless. March 21st, 867 AD. The massive Saxon army marched on York. King Osbert rode at the head of one column, his crown gleaming in the pale spring sun. Beside him rode King Aela, his rival turned ally. Behind them, thousands of warriors, their banners snapping in the cold wind.
Fractured, it will crumble.
They were coming
quickly.
to take back their kingdom. The plan was simple: overwhelm the Vikings with superior numbers, breach the gates, flood into the city and slaughter every Norseman inside. Saxon scouts reported that the Vikings had pulled most of their forces back from the walls. The garrison looked thin, nervous, even to the Saxon kings. It looked like fear. It was bait. As a Saxon army formed up outside York's walls, the Viking defenders seemed to panic. Arrows flew weakly from the battlements. The defense looked disorganized. The Saxon war horn sounded. The battering ram was brought forward. The gate shook, wood splintered, and then they broke through. The Saxons poured into York like a flood. Hundreds, then thousands of warriors surging through the breach, shields raised, weapons ready. King Osbert himself led the charge, sword held high, his bodyguard surrounding him. They were walking into a killing ground. The first wave of Saxons pushed deep into York's narrow streets. They found nothing. Empty squares, deserted streets, no enemy shield wall to break, no battle line to charge, just eerie silence. And then they realized the truth. The streets were too narrow. Their massive army was being funneled into tight corridors. Formation was impossible. The rear ranks were still pushing forward, compressing those in front. 7,000 warriors squeezed into a space that could hold hundreds. From the rooftops, Evil the Boneless looked down at the chaos below. He raised his hand and dropped it. Vikings erupted from every building. Doorways, windows, side streets, rooftops. They had been hidden inside the houses, waiting. Shield walls materialized behind the Saxons, blocking the gates, cutting off their escape route. The trap had sprung. The Saxons weren't attacking York anymore. They were trapped inside it, and the Vikings began the slaughter. 7 to 8:30, the massacre begins. Brutal, unflinching documentary tone. What followed was not a battle. It was a massacre. The Vikings had transformed York into a killing maze. Every street was a choke point, every corner an ambush. Every building held enemy warriors. The Saxon army, packed into narrow streets, couldn't form defensive lines, couldn't use their superior numbers, couldn't even swing their weapons properly. Viking axemen attacked from the front, spearmen from the sides, archers from rooftops. The Saxons tried to push back toward the gates, but shield walls of Viking warriors blocked every exit. They tried to form defensive circles, but there was no room. Professional Viking warriors, men who had fought across Europe, methodically carved through militia farmers who had never seen real combat. Saxon chroniclers would later write, "A great slaughter was made of the Northumbrians, some inside, some outside, and both kings were slain." But those simple words hide the horror of what happened in York streets that afternoon. Thousands of men, trapped and terrified, were cut down in the narrows of York. The cobblestones ran red, bodies piled in the streets. And through it all, the Vikings maintained perfect discipline. No wild charges, no breaking ranks, just cold, professional execution of a perfect battle plan. Somewhere in the chaos, King Osbert was still fighting. Surrounded by his elite bodyguard, the legitimate king of Northumbria cut his way through Viking warriors. His crown still on his head, his sword still in his hand. Whatever else can be said of Osbert, he died like a king, fighting to the last. Viking warriors swarmed his bodyguard. One by one, the protectors fell. A spear took Osbert in the chest. He stumbled, fell to one knee. A Viking sword ended it. The crown rolled into the blood-soaked mud of York streets. But King Aela's fate would be far worse. In another part of the city, Aela was overwhelmed and captured alive. The Vikings recognized him. This was a man whose throne they had taken. More importantly, this was a man rumored to have killed Ragnar Lothbrok, the father of the Viking commanders. Eivor the Boneless had waited years for this moment. Saxon sources claim Aela was executed by the legendary Blood Eagle, a ritualistic killing where the ribs were separated from the spine and spread like wings. Whether this actually happened is debated by historians. But what's certain is that Aela's death was slow, public, and meant to terrify. By sunset, both kings of Northumbria were dead, and with them died the last hope of Saxon resistance in the north. When the fighting finally ended, the scale of the disaster became clear. The Vikings had lost perhaps 100 to 200 warriors. The Saxons had lost thousands. More importantly, they had lost their army, their kings, their nobility, their will to resist. Viking warriors moved through Europe, separating survivors. Some were enslaved, others were released deliberately, sent back to their villages to spread terror about what they had seen. The Vikings cannot be defeated, these survivors would say. They killed both our kings in a single afternoon.
The Saxon army is approaching!
This was psychological warfare at its finest. Every released prisoner became a weapon that destroyed Saxon morale across northern England. Within days, the remaining Northumbrian nobles met with the Vikings. They had a choice: continued resistance to certain death, or collaboration and survival. They chose survival. A Saxon nobleman named Egbert was installed as a Viking puppet king. He would rule Northumbria in name, but take orders from evil. The kingdom of Northumbria, one of the four great Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, had ceased to exist as an independent power. It had taken the Vikings less than 6 months. The Battle of York reveals why the great heathen army was so successful. They didn't win through superior numbers. They won through superior strategy. First, intelligence. The Vikings struck during a civil war, when Northumbria was weakest. Second, preparation. They spent an entire winter fortifying York and planning their defense. Third, deception. They made their defense look weak, encouraging the Saxons to attack. Fourth, terrain manipulation. They lured the enemy into an urban environment where numbers meant nothing. Fifth, disciplined execution. While the Saxons panicked, the Vikings calmly executed their plan. This wasn't luck. This was military genius. The Vikings had studied siege warfare across Europe. They had learned urban combat in Frankish cities. They had fought professional Byzantine soldiers. And they brought all that experience to England, facing enemies who still fought like it was the 7th century. The Battle of York proved something that would terrify Anglo-Saxon England for the next decade. The Vikings didn't need to outnumber you. They just needed to outthink you. With Northumbria secure, the great heathen army turned south. Using York as their base of operations, they systematically conquered East Anglia and most of Mercia. Every battle followed the same pattern: superior tactics, disciplined warriors, and psychological terror. By 870, only one Anglo-Saxon kingdom remained independent: Wessex, in the safe west. And that's where they met their match. Wessex was ruled by a young king named Alfred, later known as Alfred the Great. He had studied Viking tactics and learned from Saxon defeats. When the Vikings attacked Wessex, Alfred fought them to a standstill. The Battle of Ashdod in 871 was the great heathen army's first major defeat, and it was led by Alfred himself. But that's another story. What matters is this: without the conquest of York, the Vikings never would have had the secure base needed to attack southern England. York was the key. The Battle of York was the moment England's fate was sealed. York, or as the Vikings renamed it, Jorvik, would remain under Norse control for over 2 centuries. The city that fell in 867 became the capital of Viking England. Archaeological evidence shows that Jorvik transformed into one of the most important trading centers in northern Europe. Viking merchants brought furs from Scandinavia, amber from the Baltic, silver from the Islamic world. The city's population swelled. Norse craftsmen, traders, and settlers mixed with the remaining Saxon population. Languages blended, cultures merged. Today, over 1,000 years later, archaeologists are still uncovering evidence of Viking Jorvik beneath modern York. Workshops, houses, artifacts, even preserved Viking-era feasts, which tell us what they ate. The Viking conquest didn't just change England politically. It changed it genetically, linguistically, culturally. DNA studies show that up to 40% of people in northern England have Viking ancestry. Hundreds of English words come from Old Norse: sky, egg, die, take, window, even the word law itself. The Vikings didn't just conquer England, they became England. March 21st, 867 AD. In less than 4 hours, 1,500 Viking warriors destroyed an army 5 times their size, killed 2 kings, and conquered an entire kingdom. The Battle of York was not the largest battle in history, but it was one of the most consequential. It proved that the age of Viking raids was over. The age of Viking conquest had begun. From their base at York, the great heathen army would go on to conquer 3 of the 4 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. They would force the greatest Saxon king, Alfred the Great, into hiding in swamps. They would create the Danelaw, a Viking territory covering half of England. And it all began here, in the narrow streets of York, where tactical genius triumphed over numerical superiority, where Evo the Boneless proved that the Vikings weren't just raiders and pirates. They were the most sophisticated military force in Europe. Today, tourists walk through York's medieval streets, unaware they are walking over one of history's greatest battlefields, unaware that beneath their feet lie the bones of thousands of Saxon warriors who died in the deadliest trap ever set by Viking commanders. The great heathen army's legacy lives on, in our language, in our laws, in our DNA, and it all began with the Battle of York.
Push forward! Break their shield wall! They are breaking! Hold the line, brothers! For the kingdom! Hold the line! Defend the king! Your time has come, King. There will be no mercy.
I promised my father revenge. Now accept your fate, King Ella.
Move, Saxon! Look at the great king now, covered in mud! Finish me!
You belong to us now!
Chain them! The rest of you, run! Tell everyone what you saw here! Let the terror spread!
Record the spoils. 3 chests of silver, 50 pounds weight in gold. And the enemy dead, 70 men.
It is inscribed.
The silver is mine. I claimed it first.
We split the gold evenly, or there will be trouble.
Enough. Divide it now before the others arrive.
Your lands are forfeit. Swear allegiance to me now, or face the consequences.
We bend the knee and pledge our fealty, my liege. By the might of our swords, I install you as King of Northumbria. Serve us well!
Fish! Fresh fish here.
Get your metal tools, strong and sharp.
Finest wool from the north.